friends, David Ryan with Gray Matters, and I am delighted to have an RX alumni who I met back in 2004 in the first Relationship Expansion for Professionals program that we did at Deloitte. It was a pilot program. John Beneke is my guest, and John has gone on to do amazing things, not only at Deloitte, but also at True Partners Consulting, and now he is a principal at Baker Tilly, leading the Illinois manufacturing and distribution practice area, but also leading the tax innovation area. And I want to hear a little bit more about that, John. But bottom line is, pal, delighted to have you. Thanks for coming.
David, thanks for the introduction and thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Hard to believe it was back in 2004, but thanks for the quick reminder from our very first Gray Matters class at Deloitte.
Like it or not, it's been 20 years, if you can believe it, and it's gone really, really fast. And so my hope here is just kind of get into a conversation about the importance of building and nurturing relationships in the marketplace. To me, you're one of the great consultative, I wouldn't even call it consultative sellers, great consultants, but also just so mindful of the importance of building and nurturing strategic, trusted relationships with clients. Not only in terms of the way you engage, but you're just such a believer of pushing it down to those individuals who are part of your teams. You live it every day. You model it. And I just think that's one of the great things about you is just paying it forward. So thank you for that. John, give us a little background, if you could, just on the work you're doing currently.
Sure. Thanks, David, for that. Well, as David mentioned, I'm a principal with Baker Tilly here in Chicago. Born and raised in the city of Chicago, spent my entire career working in and around the Chicagoland marketplace. Currently, I lead the Illinois manufacturing and distribution team, which covers both the assurance side of the house and the tax side of the house, as well as leading nationally a team called Tax Evolution and Automation, which is really focused on corporate tax functions and helping them evolve their tax processes and tax controls and environment for large public and large privately held corporate entities.
Hey, John, let me ask you, it sounds like you're advising clients on how they might leverage innovation, technology, those sorts of things. But I would think you're in a very transformative moment, considering AI and all the other things that go along with it. How you're leveraging AI as part of your service offering. How is that playing out?
It's interesting you bring that up because, you cannot talk about technology in the broader sense without hearing talk of AI. And I often pose a question around AI to my clients and to anybody I'm talking to is because really, is it a tool or is it a form of complementary workforce, right? That's really the question is, how are we using AI? And, if you think of the chat GBTs and AI creeping into pretty much our everyday life, as professionals, we're tasked with not only understanding what is it, but how can we use it to better do the jobs that we have on a daily basis. So there's no one size fits all and there's no silver bullets here. And it's evolving so quickly and creeping into areas that, you wouldn't thought of, as little as a year ago. But it's here to stay. And we just got to figure out, one, define what is it, and two, how are you going to use it? That's really where I see, our biggest questions that we try to help our clients answer is, how do you want to harness it and leverage it?
Yeah, John, I'm curious, how sophisticated are your clients in terms of their journey around leveraging technology and AI? Let's be honest, AI just really popped onto the radar. It's been there for a while, but popped on the radar in a pretty big way, maybe 18 months ago or so, and it's just taken the industry by storm. Where do you think your clients are? They've got to be right at the beginning, but are you surprised that, are they ahead of the curve, behind the curve? What are your thoughts?
I think most people are behind the curve, if there is a curve, because I think most people haven't even figured out, how they're going to use it. If they can even use it, that sounds kind of crazy, but a lot of people are evaluating is it something they can even use in their business, or does it present a risk, right? Because that's the one area that is oftentimes being asked, and I see a lot of, especially the bigger companies, evaluating what are the risks around AI, because what is it replacing within their overall function, and I focus on the tax space. So if it's replacing something in the tax function, is there a risk associated with that? Or is the AI able to mitigate the risk? So, it really is, no one's really gone full steam with it. There's still more, I would say, in the assessing and evaluating mode.
Got it, John. Listen, you and I could spend our time together just talking about that, but I want to shift gears if you don't mind. The reason you and I met was this whole idea of beginning to cultivate relationship development skills. In your case, you were a senior manager at Deloitte back in 2004, and the firm decided to make an investment in that level of individual around, hey, we got to bring more to the table than just technical skills. We need to activate this huge body of client-facing individuals. I've been working on kind of a theme, a working title for a mini podcast, and it's the concept of every touch matters. Every interaction matters. And I think given the fact that you've got a lot of young people who are coming into the marketplace who are really leaning hard into technical competence, too often they assume that that's going to carry the day in terms of the relationship. And I think you're a believer boy, we got to do more. We got to bring more to the table. It's those collective touches, not just principals like you, managing directors, partners, but all those downstream individuals who are touching the client, shaping that client experience. So important for them to feel comfortable and to recognize that they have a stake in shaping that client experience. So given all that, and I think I'm preaching to the choir, what's your kind of reaction to this concept of every touch matters?
I always, kind of talk to my team whenever we're engaged with a new client or an existing client is, I always tell them it's important for us to, go kind of broader and deeper within the organization. And every touch really does matter. For the new associate, it's important that they build relationships with individuals that they're working with on a daily basis and maybe gathering the data. For someone at my level, it's important that I have a relationship maybe with the CFO or the VP of tax and everybody in between. And there's value. And some people are influencers within the organization, and some people are the leaders within the organization. But a great leader listens to the people that are working for them. So if you have a relationship at that influencer level, and you can actually, kind of build up their trust, they're going to share with you some of the areas that may be more problematic, which is going to, help us as an organization and myself really have that meaningful conversation with, say, the VP of tax or the CFO about some things that have been shared that he may not be aware of from that level, but also influence from the bottom. And, the one thing we all realize is that organizations are very lean these days. So they're doing more with less. And so, there really is a need for kind of upstream and downstream communication. And it only helps us if we have relationships at all those levels. The other thing is that it helps mitigate the risk of what happens when a person leaves a department. Two things happen. There's going to be an opportunity, right? Because there's now an opening. So maybe that's an opportunity to provide some assistance. But that person more than likely is going to go somewhere else, which once again expands that relationship. But also there's a risk that if, say, the relationship I may have at a higher level leaves, we would not have any touch point if I was the sole person with a relationship within that organization. So these little touches, and it doesn't have to be, something dramatic, a simple phone call. I use this example with many of our young people because it's what I do on a daily basis. every morning on my drive into the office, and I think I've shared this with you previously, one of those habits that I picked up as I went through, and one of the things I built in, it wasn't anything that you directly taught, but it was all about creating those small touch points that were differentiators. Everyone gets inundated with emails. I started the practice of calling someone every morning on the drive in, someone who I haven't talked to in a while. Most of the people that we want to network with and really, kind of build that relationship with tend to be similar to us. And 9 times out of 10, I get a call back if I don't get them live. But it's very much a higher hit rate than sending an email that, oftentimes gets lost in the barrage of emails that we all receive. So, I found that works. And, I try to give little pointers like that to my team to instill those little habits that could be beneficial to them.
Yeah, great nugget. Imagine that. Actually picking up the phone and calling somebody, right? Good for you. One of the things you talked about was, all of these touches, and it feels like it has to be a coordinated effort, John. It can't be Katie bar the door, anybody who's on the ground at this particular client off kind of willy-nilly, checking in with people. How do you create that orchestration, that coordinated effort?
That's a great question. And, I'm a very process-focused person, just my management style, but I'm not a micromanager. But what I do is I like to give people an idea and give them some process. Real world example, I had a client that we had done a large project for who needed some continued assistance. So I actually had a staff person, a first-year associate, out at that client and assisting them with some of the things within their tax function that they needed assistance with. And I asked this particular individual to send me an email on a weekly basis, and I armed him with a couple of things. I said, I want you to take the team to lunch at least once a week, the team that you're working with, and just take them to lunch, build a relationship there. And at the end of the week, send me a quick email summary of what you've worked on, as well as what you've done and learned during the week. And your job is really just to listen, build a relationship and listen. That task led to a fairly significant project for us because in one of these lunches, the folks he was working with were, complaining a little bit. Another one of their service providers was being fairly unresponsive, which gave me the opportunity, because what he was not aware of is I had weekly calls with the VP of tax out there. And in one of these calls, I mentioned that, hey, I'd heard this from, our person that was there that, you might have a need. And he, happily shared with me what their need was, which literally led to a 6-figure project for us because an associate listened and shared that information. All I did was arm him with a process, 2 jobs in addition to your day job. Take them to lunch. Who doesn't like going to lunch? And listen and, build relationships with the people. They trusted him. He trusted them. They built up this, friendship in addition to their professional relationship. And they shared one of the pain points that they were having as a department. And, you don't get to that place unless you build that trust and that relationship at that level. They weren't telling on anybody. They were just sharing that, a provider that they had been working with wasn't as responsive. And, he was able to share that with me, which led to an opportunity.
Well, again, a great story, John. But you were doing a couple things there, and I hope you don't mind for the audience. Let's think about what John did. You kind of set very clear expectations for your team in terms of their efforts while they're out there. You gave this young individual a specific task about, hey, these are the things I'd like you to do on a weekly basis. Check in with me and just pay attention. When you put it on the radar for these young folks, it does a couple things. One, it creates awareness for them. 2, it gives them a green light. hey, it's okay to go do this, okay? But let's do it within the process. We don't want you going rogue per se, right? Keep me abreast of what's going on. And so leadership has to kind of coordinate tasks. It comes into account planning, account management, but you truly leading people and coordinating them and giving them some direction. So I don't think it was real heavy-handed, because just knowing you, that's not your style. But at least there were some swim lanes there for these individuals. And a lot of times these younger consultants kind of just appreciate having some very black and white direction. So I congratulate you on that. And what a great example of deal flow. If we're paying attention and then tell somebody about it, a leader like you, to go have a more senior conversation. So well done. John, let's go back 20 years, 2004, the pilot program at Deloitte. You're literally one of 25 in that first program. When you received the invitation, I don't know if you can remember this, Relationship Expansion for Professionals, you're going to be part of the pilot, and we're going to focus on, getting you more comfortable building relationships and paying attention to what's happening at your clients, and maybe uncovering deal flow and helping support revenue generation. What was your reaction to that invitation? Was it even on your radar?
It's a great question, and my memory is pretty good, and I think I probably remember thinking, well, what is this, right? My first blush was, what is this, relationship training, right? And in my mind, I'm a tax guy, and that's what I do. And, however, when I really kind of thought about it, and I think after the very first session, the one thing I did always, feel pretty comfortable with it, and the more senior I got, the more comfortable I got with kind of being out there with clients. And frankly, I really enjoyed that aspect of what I did. Not that I didn't enjoy the technical work, because that's really what got me to that place of being a senior manager. But I realized getting to the next level was going to be a lot harder, because, I needed to be able to do some things that I wasn't really armed with the skills. But being a very, like most tax people, very process oriented, this was a little bit familiar once we got into the program, because while it was a relationship and more of a softer skill, it was very process focused. I remember, and if you told me to, I'd reach into my drawer and I'd kind of pull out the binder. I still have the original binder with the REAP form that you gave us for the research for meetings that I diligently filled out. But, that initial blush, I guess, until I had that first session, I just thought of it as sales, right? That's the first thing people think of, especially for, technical folks. You talk about relationship and they think sales. And it wasn't really sales at all. It was really more going broader and deeper within relationships, but with intent. It was taking deliberate actions. It wasn't a touchy-feely thing. It gave me a process to follow. And then it also gave me the freedom to make that process my own. Because after probably the first 6 months of filling out the forms and doing those things and literally keeping a binder, I realized I didn't need the binder. I was just doing it. And that's when I developed the habits of making the phone calls on the drive into the office and, instilling in some of the things I've learned into more junior people to help them build these relationships.
John, you are such a great example of a student of the program who's applied the learnings themselves, but also seen the benefit and made sure that you start to push this out and model that behavior. So many people talk about process, talk about the rigor and the discipline that we teach. We try to be real light touch on the wheel when it comes to selling. It's more about relationship expansion, but give people a rigor, give them a discipline, get them to realize they're probably already doing a lot of this already, but we're not doing it at a level or as consistently to really truly move the needle. So again, thanks for being such a great supporter. You've hired me You've moved on in your career to several firms beyond Deloitte, and I've been honored to be able to work with you as an executive sponsor. And I think we've seen some pretty good benefit, real live deal flow that has come out of this work. Again, short answer, but why did you continue to work with us? Just pivoted from the doer to executive sponsor. Why bring us in?
As I've changed, our profession has changed.
Yeah.
And probably the biggest change that I've seen in our profession as consultants, is that, our individuals are required to be kind of in the game a lot sooner and have an awareness of the importance of relationships much sooner than me. I grew up where I was carrying the audit bag for, the manager and the partner as I was coming up in my career. And, that was a big part of my role. Now, however, with a lot of things, technology, complementary workforce that are offshore, a lot of the things that our more junior associates did kind of as those formative years in building their career, those tasks have changed significantly. And there's less of them, right? There is a little bit of a shortage of the types of individuals we hire in the marketplace. People are just taking different paths and different careers. So public accounting, professional services isn't maybe as attractive as it once was. So to kind of balance out the, kind of the need and the asset we have essentially in all of our human capital, but also leverage those skills that they've learned and get them into developing relationships sooner. And I'm talking pre-COVID was very important to me. When we started True Partners Consulting, as a brand new firm that no one knew about, our first competitive disadvantage was nobody knew about us. So I needed more boots on the street who could tell people what we did as a tax consulting firm. Fast forward here to Baker Tilly, and the landscape continues to change in the professional services practice. And it's even more important in a post-COVID year where people are just frankly working different. The hybrid work schedule presents some challenges in how do you meet people, right? It used to be you met them by going out to the client, taking them out to lunch. Who would have thought it'd be hard to invite someone to lunch and get them to accept, but that's a little bit harder because you've got to navigate schedules and hybrid work schedules and working remote, and maybe people who've even moved to a different state or city than you're in. So, there's even more challenges, which is really reinforcing the fact that these skills are really important, and how you apply them today is different than how you would have applied them, 4 years ago. So there's a continued need, I think, to help people, realize the importance of relationships, because that still is probably the number one thing that helps drive our business is establishing these trusted relationships and building upon them. Magnificent.
So again, key takeaways. You talk about how important relationships are and how things have changed a little bit. We've had to adapt how we apply these, but one of the universal truths has been the importance of relationships. What has changed, I think, in the last 20 years also is who we're targeting for this. Back 20 years ago, it was manager, senior manager level, because they had nothing like this up to that point. And so we played catch up with them. And then I think what's happened is a lot of people started to realize, well, this content is pretty straightforward. It's nothing terribly earth-shattering that even the more junior people could benefit from. So let's start introducing them sooner. And that's what I'm hearing from you. John, maybe some examples from you personally and or the firms you've led, practices you've led, and applying some of the RX learnings, the discipline, the rigor, some of the fundamental skills and behaviors. What have been the benefit? Was it deal flow? Was it deeper relationships? Was it turning a client that was going south into a really positive experience? Maybe an example or two.
real example, and this is something that I've benefited from for a number of years with this particular individual. So I had an individual that I worked with early on in my career, back in my Arthur Andersen days, who was actually a counselee of mine. And at some point in his career, he left professional services and went into a corporate tax role. And I've actually worked with this particular individual at 4 separate companies that this individual has worked at. And so he's hired me for, various projects at these companies. And I've really become as much of a service provider as a friend, as well as a kind of a trusted advisor. In every one of his changes in his career, I've served in a reference capacity, as a sounding board to say, hey, what do you think about this role versus that role? And just, as recently as 2 weeks ago, we just had a follow-up discussion. He's taken on a leadership role for another company. And he reached out to me because he's looking to fill some roles. And you don't get to that level unless you maintain those relationships and build those relationships. Even when I wasn't selling him any services, I would make a point to take this individual up on his offer to reach out to him just to have a conversation. And many times there are many conversations about his family and things that were going on, as well as his professional side of things. But just staying top of mind has created opportunities just for being there, I think. I had built a strong relationship professionally, but then when you get to that personal level where, they will reach out for personal advice in terms of maybe their own career, he kind of still viewed me a little bit in that, kind of mentor capacity, which is a great thing. But you don't get to that point by not having small touch points. And I never took it as just an opportunity to sell some services to this individual. In fact, I don't think I ever really sold services. What I did is I listened. And, he would reach out to me and tell me, hey, I'm in this role. I need some help. Is it something you can do, or can maybe someone help me out?
John, so many takeaways from that, but the key one is just stay top of mind, stay engaged. Too often we have consultants, providers who had a wonderful, deep relationship with a particular client or stakeholder at one point in their career. Maybe that person left, maybe the project wound down, and that was it. It was months or maybe years before that individual or the providers got back in touch with this individual. So the momentum was lost. You're talking about these little touches. They don't have to be business related all the time. Staying top of mind. You never know when a need might pop up. And you continue to nurture that relationship both on a business front as well as a personal front. To me, it's playing the long game, but it does take time. It does take effort, right? We just can't go, I'll reach out to somebody or these handful of individuals when my inbox gets cleared out. Well, that never happens. We all know that, right? So we have to have a plan, a discipline for making a little bit of time to do these kind of reach outs and touches. So thank you for that. John, we're kind of winding down here, and I can't thank you enough for being a great friend, but also just an amazing supporter and advocate of what we're doing here at Gray Matters. You're part of the Relationship Xpansion alumni community on LinkedIn, and thank you for being part of that. We've touched about 10,000 individuals over the course of our 20 years of doing this. We have about 350 individuals in the group. We're pushing content refreshers to that group. It is a opt-in and private group on LinkedIn. But the hope is I want to continue to support those individuals who've gone through the program. Why are you part of that community?
Well, one, it's a great community, right? And it would be negligent of me, having participated in the program to probably miss an opportunity to network with other people who've gone through the program and seen some of the benefits and share some of the stories. But more importantly, it kind of keeps me connected to, never forgetting the importance of, how much relationships matter. And I think, while I developed certain habits that just became, kind of my weekly, daily routine in terms of maintaining some of these relationships, it never hurts to have a little bit of a refresher and a touch point. So, whether it's you and I getting together and talking about some things over, dinner, or, listening in to some of your, kind of podcasts that, really crystallize. I can't tell you how many times I've forwarded a lot of those along to others that I thought would benefit from them. But I think, it's one of those skills that you're always going to learn something new and be able to, kind of enhance what you currently do by making small little tweaks. It's like any other type of skill you have, right? You never stop learning and you never stop refining. And, that's why it's important to me.
Thank you so much. I've heard similar from other people in the community. They just like to kind of refresh, but also a nugget that they heard a few years ago might not have taken root. But boy, this was a point. I'm in a situation where, wow, I hadn't thought about that. That's a nugget that's clearly relevant to a situation that I'm in. You never know how things might play out. But again, I can't thank you enough, John. I know this was sort of a last minute thing. You jumped into the podcast seat, and I'm so grateful for this time, but also for your friendship and your support along the way. So, John Beneke, any final thoughts as we wind down?
I mean, the one thought I would leave people with: relationships matter, right? It's still in the area of professional services. Relationship are still what drives the day. That's what makes for some meaningful opportunities, both personally and professionally, right? I always tell folks, if people like to work with people that they frankly like to be with and spend time with, and relationships, it's just so integral to that.
John, thank you. So honored to have you. Get back to work. Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.